Good morning, everyone. My names are Nchima Kasongo, as earlier stated from Kalenga. So traditionally, banks have been seen as the main providers of access to capital. And globally, Zambia's economy is ranked 19th of the 189 economies. But yet again, entrepreneurs have had a tough time to access loans and other services from the banks. It is for this reason that we're here having a debate under the motion which states, are banks still relevant to the Zambian entrepreneur? A brief roundup of the rules that our debaters were given. In the beginning, the first two speakers on each side will have 5 minutes each to speak. And within that 5 minutes, each of them will be given a chance to interrupt the other, but them to allow the speaker to talk is entirely up to them. So after both speakers speak for 5 minutes from both sides, we'll open it up to the floor. You get to give your contribution or question to either the proposing side or the opposing side. So after you give your question, please note your question should be in a range of 1 minute or 1 minute 30. Once those questions are done, we will have the summarizers from each of the sides to come over and summarize their statements and also answer your questions as you asked. In your packs as you are getting in, you notice two papers, one which is green and one which is red. Those are not decorations or they're not representing any bank or anyone advertising outside. Those papers are actually what you use to judge. We do not have any judges. You, the audience, are the judges. So the green card or the green paper actually represents yes, supporting the proposing team. And the red paper or the red card actually says no, supporting the opposing team. So please note and bear witness to what our speakers will say. Take it closely. If you want to support the opposing team or the proposing team, you could ask questions to the opposite side so that you could, maybe intimidate the bankers or the opposers, depending on who you favor. I'll call upon the first speaker from the proposing side, Regina Mlenga. Ladies first.
We are not just talking about commercial banks. We are talking about venture capital, banks. We're talking about development banks. We're talking about investment banks. We are talking about our commercial banks. But I know that we are in Zambia. So in Zambia, we are mostly familiar with our commercial banks. And since Charles and I are from the commercial banking, let's talk about the relevance of our commercial banking in Zambia. Initially, history of the banks, as we all know, all the banks, they took deposits and loaned money. And that went on for a long time. Customer needs have changed, and banks are not dinosaurs. We have changed. We are looking at the customer needs. What do customers need? You as entrepreneurs, you obviously still need to deposit and borrow. Yeah, we agree? Agreed. But we also need to support you with the capacity building. In the earlier session, we heard roundabout, how can you be successful? If you don't have the skill, the technical know-how you want. Banks are now partnering with different stakeholders, like Nyamuka Zambia, for example, to make sure that you guys are ready for work. That the entrepreneurs know exactly what is it that is required. Banks are also making sure that you linked to markets. Banks are working with other businesses, including some of the customers within the banks. We have large corporates that would want to buy from you. We provide those linkages to the markets. We provide linkages to the suppliers. We also know that at the end of the day, you will need to develop your business cases. you will need to take advantage of the opportunities. So what are we doing as banks, other than taking the deposits and lending you some when we can, is to also make sure that, when you identify a business opportunity, we link you to people who will help you put it together so that you sell your story properly. Without telling a story, it is difficult for you to get access to finances. In Zambia in particular, from the SMEs, the bank industry, across the sector, we only get about 14% of deposits that are coming from the SMEs. But guess what? 18% of the banking sector loan portfolio goes to the SMEs. Do the maths. 18% minus 14%, the support to the SMEs is a lot more than we take from the SME. So, as banks, are we still relevant? I move that, yes, indeed, we are relevant. As banks, we are not dying, but we are changing to meet the changing needs of the enterprise businesses. In terms of the opportunities where the SMEs are working right now, we know very well that in terms of energy, that is an area where you are looking at working. In energy, we are active. We are working with the large corporates, and we are also working around the value chain. Banking now is not just banking the individual, it's banking the individual, the small business, and the big business, and providing those linkages. Agriculture, we are active there. In all the different sectors, all the banks are active to make sure that we progress as a country and as an industry. I move the motion.
I will now invite Irene Bandam Talema to give us her case.
I am standing here this morning to say that banks are not relevant to the Zambian entrepreneur. Banks are not relevant to the realities of the Zambian entrepreneur today. Let's talk about those realities. One of the things that we see now, there is an increasing number of young people, and these young people are creative, and they are going into the business space. There's also a stagnation of the formal job market. So when you're done with your education, there's really no job for you. And so we are seeing young people that are going into the business space because some of them are creative, they actually want to be entrepreneurs, and some of them are going into that space because they can't get a job. And because of high unemployment, we are also seeing across the age divide, people finding themselves in the entrepreneurial space. Interestingly, one of the things, in 2012, Zambia participated in the GEM survey, which is the Global Entrepreneurial Monitoring Survey. And the findings of that survey said that 41%, which is a high number, in Zambia has early stage entrepreneurial activity. So we have a high number of people that are going into the entrepreneurial space, which is a good thing. However, the survival rate was cited at 4%, which is a tenth of the people that are going into the entrepreneurial space are actually not making it. Businesses are not surviving. So what's happening? What's happening to businesses? There are a variety of obstacles. I need to emphasize there are a whole range of obstacles. There is, however, one constant thread, and that thread is the limited access to credit. Let me quote some statistics. The 2010 FinMax survey talked about limited access to credit, which was one of the reasons why small businesses were not making it. The 2012 GEM report that talked about it, that I cited earlier on, actually said 70% of startups in this country depend on their savings or money that they get from friends and relatives. They are not necessarily being supported by the financial sector. And most recently, last year, the FinScope survey that was done in Zambia actually cited only 4.2% of the people that were in the survey, only 4.2% are borrowing from the banks. 71.2% are getting their money from relatives, that wonderful uncle that you need all the time. You need them closer to you now, because that's where your money is going to come from. What does this mean for an entrepreneur? I think I need to step back and acknowledge the improvements that have happened in our financial sector. We really acknowledge that there's been a buzz recently about supporting SMEs, supporting the entrepreneurs, and there are actions that have taken place to support entrepreneurs. But I'm standing here to say that it's not enough. It's not getting to where it is needed the most. And so something needs to happen. Can banks be a bit more supportive? Indeed, especially with startups, banks will cite the riskiness of it. And so our question is, can banks not be able to manage the risk? What support are they putting on the table in order to understand the risk that entrepreneurs are facing in this country and actually mitigate those risks? Can banks be a bit more supportive? So at the end of the day, we do not have enough funding coming to entrepreneurs in this country, and therefore the banking sector has not been relevant. Once you pass through the challenge of opening an account, which is a challenge, you now have to worry about whether they are going to support you. So where does that leave us? I would have loved to take that point of order. I only have 40 minutes, so could I ask you to bring the point of order on you? Sorry for that. So where does that leave the entrepreneur? We need mechanisms that will help the entrepreneurs to be able to access the financing. We know, indeed, our ANCO is the best bet, the savings that we can make if we have the capacity to make those savings. But I think we need to start exploring other mechanisms. Can we look at crowdfunding? We do need business angels. And so what I would encourage you as you are voting this morning, I would encourage that you vote to agree that banks are not yet as supportive as we would like them to be.
So moving on, I heard Charles Carey yesterday, even as we were preparing, saying, this is going to be a walkover for me. Victory is mine. And now, let's see why he says victory is his. Calling upon the second speaker from the proposing side, Charles Carey.
Good morning and greetings to this esteemed gathering of Lusaka's next generation of business elites. I would also like to extend my compliments to my co-defendant from Barclays, as well as my former sector colleagues, both of whom have worked extensively in the banking industry, and indeed for banks that we currently work for. We don't take this as assassination or by a sort of Trojan horse. A man walks into a bank in New York City and asks the loan officer for a loan for $5,000 as he's going to Europe on a business trip. The bank officer says the bank will need some form of security for the loan, so the man hands over his keys to the car, which is outside, a $250,000 Ferrari. The bank officer agrees to accept the car as collateral, and they finalize the documentation, and the man leaves. The car's parked in the basement of the bank in central downtown New York. 2 weeks later, the man returns. He goes up to the officer and says, I need to pay for my loan. And the officer calculates how much interest is outstanding. It's $15.41. The loan officer says, the man hands over the cash, pays back the $5,000, pays back the $15.41, gets his keys back, and is about to walk out of the building. And the loan officer says, sir, we're a bit puzzled. A man of your standing with a Ferrari needs to borrow $5,000. Please, can you explain? The gentleman turns back and says, my dear friend, where in New York can you park for 2 weeks for $15.41? I think that shows the synergy, thank you, between banks and entrepreneurs. Banks have been around for nearly 500 years. Medici, a trader in Italy, started the program and has a cutting-edge concept called double entry bookkeeping. And since then, we have been part and parcel of the economy. As Malenga indicated, we're not just about debt. There's a lot more to banking than just lending, and there's a lot more to banking outside just pure debt structures, whether it's capital or working capital, loans, and other structured finance. Banks, as a regulated entity or regulated industry in this economy, provide security, we provide confidence, we provide expertise, and we provide essentially a housing component to where you can bank the proceeds of of your entrepreneurial business. And that actually is what we found, is that a lot more SMEs save than actually borrow. And I think if we look at our own specific sector in terms of our bank, although we've got 60% of our portfolio is to SMEs, we also have nearly sort of just under 70% of our deposits is from the SME business. And it is actually, providing that cash management, providing the collection services, providing the ability to pay and receive payments, and in a secure, regulated way, is actually what is increasingly demanded by the SME and entrepreneur. I'm sure, as the keynote speaker, Mr. Brad McGrath, said earlier, his product is based on providing transaction services, moving money from a creditor to a debtor, and vice versa, making those connections. It's absolutely essential, and that is far more important than just being able to provide capital. We've recently funded nearly 20 of our team to go on a SME executive diploma program. And within the sort of 12 days of that program, the level of expertise that they developed and the connections that they had with the customers thereafter was extraordinary. A few hours of their time providing the right sort of guidance and questions to an entrepreneur can actually lead to a huge development of business and a recognition of the value that such expertise, even though it's still in a very vanilla level, can provide. And I think essentially that's what we're housing, is a formal environment, a trusted environment, a confident environment where we can provide expertise and structure to an entrepreneur's enterprise and ensure that we provide the level of guidance and control around how they bank and what they do. I think it's something that we will be here, we need to adapt, but we're an essential component of the economy for many decades to come.
Thank you very much, Charles, for that wonderful speech.
So now, sorry, a caveat to that. With all due respect to Michelle Obama, this was my speech.
Thank you very much, Charles, for another spice to the speech. A brilliant conclusion. So now, moving on, we're going to have the last speaker from the opposing side, who is no other than Sipa Piri.
Now, Charles is right. I am a former banker of many years, and I'm relatively proud of being a banker. But there's a reason I left banking. So I often refer in public to the fact that I am now, I was a gamekeeper turned poacher, and I'm now on the other side. So I'm very proud to be standing here. Let's be clear. Banks have an essential role to play in any economy anywhere in the world. And the question before us is, are they playing it in Zambia? It's just that simple. And we must also remember that we also play a role. It's not just, is it the bank's fault? I mean, how many of us would lend to SMEs from our own savings? And our savings are in these banks. So they do have these responsibilities. And we, on the Tamanga side, have a responsibility as well. And I'm not sure that we always fulfill that responsibility. At the SEC breakfast this morning, someone politely said, the SMEs in Zambia have behavioral issues. And we must remember that those are the things. So the other big issue in Zambia is GRZ, crowding out the market. And I'll get to that as to why those are issues surrounding the banks. But really, what is their role? 3 roles: keeping our money safe and growing it, transaction services, and lending. Those are the primary functions of banks, and do they fulfill them? To some extent, all of them they do fulfill. The question is, with banks in Zambia, do they store our money safely? Great regulation from Bank of Zambia, if we're not over-regulated. The banks are much safer than they used to be. So how have they failed in that service? From opening an account, as my first speaker clearly laid out, it's difficult. It's not surprising to take 2 months to open an account to keep your money safe. But the key issue, as Charles pointed out, SMEs are saving money. And what are they getting for that? very often, historically, over a period of time, right now you might be able to get good interest rates, but historically, you have saved under the rate of inflation. So actually, when you're storing your money in the bank, it's safe, but it's costing you. It's below the rate of inflation. And banks have not really been able to address that. I believe they have the ability to address it, but that would affect profits. Second one is transaction services. Zambian banks have effectively become transaction service providers. That's what they do. You look at their financials at the end of the year. Oh, my time's running out. You look at at the end of the year or every quarter they publish them. What is their main income? Fees. Other than interest from the government, it's fees, because they're fee-driven transaction services. Banks now, and I'm sure everyone here, if I put their hand up, name one free service that the bank gives you. Because I believe there is one, and it's when you deposit your money, they'll take it for free. But otherwise, they will charge you. They will charge you for the checkbook. They will charge you at the cash point. They will charge you, and there's some very fundamentals. These charges, when you add them up, are very, very substantial to business, damage business. What they're supposed to be doing, in my view, traditional banking from 500 years ago, is they're supposed to get the money, they're supposed to give you a good rate, and they're supposed to take risks. They're supposed to lend that money. And they do lend that money. 18% of it to the SME, when you've given them 3 times security. The rest goes to government and to multinationals. 18%. Now, my argument is that all of these things have to come together. They have to give us better interest rates. Then 13%, or whatever the statistic was, we would increase the deposits because we know we're making money inside the bank. We're not losing money. And then we would have a larger share. But they've also got to lend more money to the SME. So I propose that the banks are not fulfilling their role to the full potential that they should be to enable us to grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sipo. So at this moment in time, we'll open the debate to the audience.
Well, I'm the board chairperson of Zanaco, and I'd like to congratulate the panelists. I have not heard from those that are against Brexit that the banks are not relevant. I've heard what they are not doing. So in so speaking, the banks are definitely relevant. So I'm actually coming here to congratulate Regina and Charles on their argument, and perhaps to re-emphasize the need for safe depository of funds. We know that in the villages especially, we have had instances where farmers or SMEs have buried the money in the ground and it has been damaged by termites or mildew. So the relevance of a bank there is also very much emphasized. The unfortunate thing is that they're not in the rural areas where they should be. So to speak on behalf of the Remain, I think we are now in Brexit mode. It's important that we re-emphasize the security, confidence, and advisory roles that banks play, but there is still room for improvement. Thank you.
Now, if the question is, are banks still relevant today? But then you have to look at the macro environment in which the banks are playing in. We have the GRZ borrowing domestically for roads and infrastructure, so they suck up the money from the banks, which leaves just about little for SMEs. Now, with this crowding out effect that raises the interest rates, can we honestly say banks are not relevant, or the macro environment in which banks are is difficult for them to operate? For example, the Bank of Zambia has a monetary policy stance of tight monetary policy, where they're using the interest rates to battle inflation. Inflation is high right now. It's in 21 and above %. And we have the kwacha facing depreciation. So to make the kwacha stronger again, the Bank of Zambia is reducing liquidity, working on overnight lending rates, making it hard for banks to operate in Zambia. So the question is, are banks relevant, or is the macro environment in which banks are placed in today in Zambia hard to operate in?
I don't know the name of the gentleman, the CEO for Cavmont. In his preamble, he mentioned that the introduction he gave of a gentleman who went to actually get a loan from the bank. According to my computation, it even showed that that gentleman got the money from that bank at 0.3%. That was the interest rate. Now, if you look at our situation today in Zambia, we see that if you go to any bank, the interest rate is over 40%. And if you look at also the collateral they ask for, like mentioned by the gentleman on the opposing side, it's actually maybe 3 times the amount you're getting from the bank. So we see that the banks actually are not relevant. Why? Because the interest rate is too much. And compared to the bank, which compared to the interest rate is about 0.3%, which are actually could support entrepreneurs if the rate was at that much compared to our never supporting banking sector. Then the other issue also, if we look at the savings, if you look at the savings today, so that the amount they may give you after saving, the percentage probably could be somewhere 12-13%, and against the interest rate, if you were to go back to the same bank and probably want to get a loan, you see that it's over 40%. Then if you do the computation there, you have a minus of almost, I don't know, it's 28 somewhere there, which those are just the profits which goes to the bank. So which, on the other side, I would still support the opposing side that banks do not actually support entrepreneurs. Because at the end of the day, even if you are to save with them, the amount they will give you, if you go back to the same bank and ask for a loan, they will actually get 25%, 28% rather, 28 to 27% more than you are actually saved. So it showed really that banks do not support entrepreneurs.
It's question timeout.
My name is Friday Skazwe from Future Search, and I've been a banker for 16 years. My contribution is that banks are no longer necessary in the sense that when you look at the enterprise department or development, and more especially from an experience point of view, you look at a startup who wants finance and he has got a very good business plan, but he can't go and get money from the big banks. They end up going to microfinancials. Microfinancials exploit them. By the time they realize they've paid back everything that they've made in form of interest, then in the process they remain without anything. The good idea dies down. Banks must do something through the Bankers Association. Despite the difficulty they are going through in terms of what my colleague explained, they have to come up with something through strategic planning so they can be able to attend to a startup. Thank you.
I believe that the banking industry has been around for a while, and all the SMEs that try to get into business at one point or another, they've at least gone to the bank to try and get assistance and so on from the bank, meaning that banks have had to deal with a lot of entrepreneurs. They have a vast amount of knowledge and information about the operation of businesses and so on. So even when a business fails, the bank should have an idea as to why that business has failed, because they were working with that SME, isn't it? So what I'm trying to say is that with the amount of time that banks have been in operation, by now they have at least a good knowledge of what each kind of business, what kind of challenges they face and so on, meaning that when an SME goes to a bank, the bank should actually consider more to provide support in terms of information. You know, the bank would tend to have actually more information about your business than you actually do yourself. Because of the fact that they've been in operation for so long, your business idea is not a new idea, most likely. So they should be able to provide support, and in that way, they'll be able to increase the number of successful SMEs on the market. And if that number increases, obviously, the interest rate wouldn't be so high. So I believe that the banking sector isn't doing enough to support the SMEs in that area. Thank you.
At this moment in time, I would now ask everyone to pay an extra sense of attention because they will be answering your questions, and this might be the chance that you will make your choice on which card to lift. Is it going to be the green side or the red side?
If we get quite serious about the debate, and rather than trying to score points, I think it's important that actually what Charity mentioned around, perhaps the question should have been is, are we fulfilling the requirements? And I think that's probably the most pertinent point. Of course we're relevant, but are we actually doing what we should be doing, and can we do it better? But before I go into that, I want to perhaps answer a couple of the points made or challenges presented. One is the sort of ordeal of account opening. It's perhaps seen as a sort of a medieval trial by sort of jury, but actually, if you think about it, although it's a requirement, who wouldn't want to know that the bank or the institution they're dealing with is a trustworthy institution that is not doing money laundering or could potentially be closed by some regulator because of some nefarious activity which is being pursued. You want to know that the institution that is regulated and one in whom you've placed cash is trustworthy and transparent and is applying a level of criteria to everybody that's going into that institution. That is what brings you to that bank and is what gives you a trust and confidence with that institution. So although it is tedious perhaps, tiresome, it is also an essential component of it. As you've seen, even in the mobile network operators and other institutions now, that requirement is becoming more and more apparent, and the need to know your customer is a very heavy obligation upon all institutions. The issue of funding and interest rates, I think, I wanted to just, during my presentation, I wanted to move away from that. Although it's an important component, it is not the only reason that banks are there. Yes, the market is crowded, interest rates have gone up, but it's a supply and demand issue. If liquidity is tight, that means those who have deposits are going to be paid more from their deposits. That's just the sort of law of economics. And liquidity has been tight. Central bank has moved statutory reserve from 5 to 8 to 14 to 18%. And that means that there's 18% out of the economy or out of the banking sector, which would otherwise be available to lend and obviously then increase the supply of cash to borrowers. Mr. Piri mentioned fees. And I'd like to ask, where do you not have to pay fees now for any professional service? It is becoming the norm. You go to a travel agent, you change a ticket or you buy a ticket, there's a fee. You go to a lawyer, and if you actually walk away with your fingers, you also leave a lot of cash on the table there. Supermarkets charging for bags, sometimes now you have to put £1 in the trolley to actually use the trolley. So everywhere there are fees being levied. And as a professional service provider, I think you'd rather pay something for a quality product to enable you to get the solution that you require. Banks must evolve and adapt, as we have been doing for nearly 500 years. And if you look at the disruptive technologies that have entered our industry, we cannot afford to sit and watch the technology drive the business in a way that we don't engage on or take advantage of. If you look at the mobile network operators, the money transfer businesses, insurance companies, they're all taking a big piece of the financial sector pie. And we need to make sure that what we're doing, how we're regulated, and what we're offering is actually relevant to the Zambian entrepreneur. And I firmly believe it is. I would like to finish my comment with two small sentences. One is, in our industry, you don't need a blesser. You simply need a bank with no strings attached. The value that we provide and the relevance that we have, again, is unreplicable. Going back to the funding cost, because we're not a nation of savers, that means that there's a limitation around the liquidity and the funds available. What we do need to do, perhaps, is develop a bigger array and sort of bouquet of savings products to encourage the Zambian community to save more and perhaps create a bigger savings culture, which would obviously then be passed on as a funding value to the borrower. I think reaching the broader market, the fact is that we have so much of the Zambian entrepreneurs. I think only 46.1% of Zambian business owners actually bank or have bank accounts for that entity. So clearly we need to extend our coverage and ensure that we actually create the product opportunity and coverage to move into a relevant institution for that entrepreneur. By using technology, we can actually get over the cost hurdle of setting up branch networks and just provide the services through the sort of Kazang and Zona-type products that are out there. Sorry, Brad, I meant to say Zona. But that's what we need to do. We need to get over the bricks and mortar and move into technology and exploit it further. But does that mean that we're not relevant? Absolutely not. We will and are and will remain an essential component to the industry and to the entrepreneur. We will continue to provide valuable, trusted, confident services, professionally delivered throughout the branch network in Zambia. There are 19 banks, probably with another, I think it's now sort of 350 branches. I think there are nearly 1,000 ATMs, and all of which provide the channel and the connection for the entrepreneur to access to a trusted formal environment in which they know that the money that they've hard earned is safely maintained and hopefully added value to. So with that, I hand over to the chairman to continue with the debate on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles, for that lovely, conclusive summary. So at this point in time, I'm going to invite the last speaker from the opposing side, who is no other than Sipho Piri, to give his summary. Okay, that's Charles saying banks love entrepreneurs with a big heart on it.
I had a decision to make this morning as to how to dress. Do I dress how I normally dress in my Tamanga life, or do I dress as a former banker in my pinstripe suit? So I came as a banker because whilst I'm not here to bash my former colleagues, I'm here to win the debate. And the reason I'm here to win the debate is that banks need to change, and they need to change faster than they're changing. And yes, they should be relevant, but are they actually relevant to most of us? I understand some of the bankers who stood up, very pertinent questions, but if you remember, I started my speech, my counter, with the fact that it's not only the responsibility of the banks. There are wider responsibilities. There are responsibilities of the entrepreneur, there's responsibilities of the government, and these create the macro environment in which the banks are operating. And currently, it's an extremely difficult macro environment, very short on liquidity, a very tight central bank, high inflation. So these are very challenging, it's a very challenging environment for the banks. But it is not the issue of is the environment challenging. If it's challenging for the banks, imagine how challenging it is for the entrepreneur. And so this is why I'm talking about this issue of relevance. The banks need to become more relevant. And I think Charity put it well. Yes, they do fulfill functions. But what I am arguing is that storing our money safely is relevant, yes, but it's not relevant enough. It's not enough for them to, they're providing a service which is not fulfilling the needs of the entrepreneur in Zambia. And it's a struggle. I think my colleague here on the opposition clearly laid out the issue of the difficulty of opening a bank account. I mean, it's unacceptable. I mean, I'm terrified of losing my my water bill becoming prepaid, which is about to become, I believe, because how do I prove my address? I've got a prepaid phone, I've got prepaid Zesco. Where's my utility bill? And I don't have an employer to confirm that I'm employed and this is where I live. So these are issues the banks have done nothing about. I've had my bank accounts closed, checks bounced, because, oh, we lost your KYC information and we can't operate your account until you give it to us again. This is not someone who is relevant or trying to be relevant, or a sector that is trying to be relevant. So to come back to some of the issues, the first question raised about the crowding out, the second question, that was Charity's first, about the crowding out. Yes, it's not all the bank's fault, but we're not here to say, why are they not relevant? We're here to say, currently they're not relevant. And they're here to say what they will do to become relevant, as far as I'm concerned. I don't really think this is that much of an argument. So There were some other questions around entrepreneurs, supporting SMEs. I'm not saying that the banks don't try either. They do. Some banks harder than others. But trying, I don't think, is where we need to be. Some of these transactions, fees, for example, Charles mentioned this issue of fees. Yes, we do need fees. I'll be interested to see if I can go to my bankers and ask them if I can charge them a fee for me depositing every day. I don't think they're going to agree, like lawyers, like everyone else, that the customer gets a fee for depositing. These same banks, most of them are international banks. In their countries of origin, they don't charge the fees the way they charge here. You don't necessarily get charged for an ATM abroad or in their home country for using your own bank's ATM. You don't get charged for a checkbook because those are covered in the way they lend. And I think the hard environment for the banks, what they've done is simply shift a lot of that responsibility of compensating for the difficulties with increased statutory reserves and so on, harder operating environments, tougher on their deposits. They've shifted it to adding fees to us. And again, that makes them less relevant, not more relevant. So I would like to propose that the banks, whilst they should be relevant and could be relevant, are currently not relevant. Thank you.
So that just put an end to the game. The final whistle has been blown. This is a time for you now to pick your cue cards. And sorry, we do not need to see people lifting both of them. If you're in the middle, please get decided right now. There is a side that is being headed by Charles Kerry and another side with Sipho Phiri. It's been a battle. I don't know if I'm the one who's been following it, but it's been an eye for an eye right now. So this is why the friendship ends. I don't know who is going to win, but may the speakers know that I'm nowhere near involved in enticing any vote. So do not hate me. I'm being asked for a card here, but I do not have any cards. So it's about that time when we raise our cards. The green card is for the proposing side, Charles Kerry team, and the red card is for the opposing side, Sipho Phiri team. And now, this is when we reveal. I can see some people undecided. Okay, so can we raise our cards? Wow, wow. By a line of sight, with no doubt, 50+1, the winners of this debate are the opposing team, the ones that say, congratulations to Sipho Phiri and Ms. Irene Mutalima for winning this lovely debate. And I would now ask the speakers to actually cross-reference and give a handshake and, congratulate each other. There is no loser here. All of you are winners, just that one is loved more by the audience.
Brought to you by Nyamuka Zambia and partner sponsors.
Nyamuka Zambia.